Welcome back to the Foundation C# course. We're currently in Module 7. In this lesson, we're going to be covering the introduction to .NET Core. And I struggle with where to put this because .NET Core is something that Microsoft has come out with to basically replace the .NET framework, which is what we've been using. And you may wonder, well, has everything I've learned up until now, gone away or had it been redone? The answer is no. And that's why I didn't go into the .NET Core from day one, because the .NET Core is still being built. And it's something that it is production ready. They're actually on .NET Core 3 right now. But it's still something that I think we need to talk about and differentiate so we understand what is .NET Core versus what is .NET Framework. Is there a difference? And how do we look at this thing? So let's go to Visual Studio, and we're not going to do code in this lesson, but instead I want to look at just the differences. So we have Visual Studio 2019, and if I say a new project, and one of the lessons that we're going to get into next is the class library. So we're going to talk about the class library, how to build it, and those types of things. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to look at the different class library projects because it will kind of illustrate the different types of .NET Core versus .NET Framework out there. Besides, you've already seen the class library project type already. We've done .NET Framework. But let's do this. Let's filter a list by C# only, and the project type will be library. Now there's more libraries than just class library. Notice WPF custom control library. That's a library. But let's look at the one that say class library. In fact, we can even filter and say class library, like so. And now we have some options here. We have the .NET Standard class library. Notice in parentheses it says .NET Standard. And then we have class library Universal Windows, also known as UWP. And then we have the class library here with .NET Framework in parens. And then we have another one that says class library .NET Core. And those are the major class libraries. There's other ones that are out there, but those are the major ones. So why do we have so many options? Well, let's start off with what we started with, and that is the .NET Framework class library. This used to be called just class library. This is the foundation. This is the first one that came out. And as you know, a class library, its job is just to hold code. That's its primary job. Well, that was based upon the .NET Framework. And the .NET Framework came out around the 2001-2002 era with .NET 1.0. And since then, it has evolved and grown until now it's .NET Framework 4.8. And so that's the latest version that's out. Well, that's a lot of progress. And this is 2019 when I'm recording this, and 4.8 is just recently out. So with that is around 17 or so years of progress, not counting even before they started, when they started building .NET Framework. There's between 17 and 19, 20 years of work and coding. And so over time, as you know, when you build something, over time, it kind of gets out of date and you have to keep updating it. And you'll learn this as you develop applications the same way. If you build a house 20 years ago, the features that are in that house will become dated. You'll see the era that was built in and go, okay, that was built in the 80s because of these cabinets or this flooring, whatever it is. And if you want to modernize it, you have to rip those things out and put, new flooring in or whatever. Well, the same thing is kind of true with .NET Framework. We can start to see its age because it has to support all these legacy things from almost 2 decades ago. And while it's done a great job, there's an awful lot of code in there that works through handling that legacy stuff. So what do we do with that? How do we handle the idea that There's all this legacy stuff. And while patching and changing has done a great job, Microsoft said, you know what? I think we need to go back to the drawing board. Because one of the things that we have focused on for so long is Windows. Windows everything. When .NET Framework came out, Microsoft was a very Windows-focused company. Their bread and butter, their thing that they focused on was selling Windows licensing. That was their primary thing, or one of their primary things. Now, Windows is kind of like a side burner thing that Microsoft does. Yes, they sell Windows, but that's not their primary focus. Their primary focuses are on things like machine learning and Azure. Well, those are things that we use code for, but they're not necessarily from a Windows platform. And so Microsoft said, how can we support not just a Windows platform, but a Mac platform and a Linux platform? And the answer is with the .NET Framework, you can't. It's just too hard. Now, there's things that have tried to do it, like the Mono project, where they take a part of the .NET Framework and they use that to go to other platforms. But taking the whole .NET Framework just wouldn't work. There's too many things that are tied directly into Windows. And so Microsoft said, what if we went back to the drawing board and reimagined or start over from scratch almost with .NET Framework, but in this time, learn from these 2 decades of experience, do things right the first time, and also open it up to be less dependent on one platform, namely Windows, and instead be more open to other platforms like Mac and Linux. And so they came up with the .NET Core. And it's been out for a few years now. And currently, like I said, we're at major release 3, which this is great time to get in a .NET Core. But one of the tenets that Microsoft worked on was the idea that it wouldn't take much to upgrade. The fact that it's not a brand new language. It's not a different thing than C#. It's the same C#. It's just that it now works on more platforms. And the other side benefit is removing all of that legacy support and that legacy code base and redoing it right the first time allows them, and more modern, I guess you could say, allows the .NET Core framework, the .NET Core, to be much, much faster. And so the code for .NET Framework versus .NET Core will look identical or practically identical. It's C#, either way. But the speed difference will be noticeable in any sort of a larger size project. And if you notice here, this class library says it's a C# library, it works on Windows, and it's a library. Down here, this class library for .NET Core is a C# project that works on Windows, Linux, and Mac, and it's a library. So just changing from one to the other gives you that difference. And it seems like it's a simple solution. Let's just go to .NET Core. But that's just a part of the overall picture. Because then we have other library types like the Universal Windows type, which is for UWP projects, Universal Windows Platform, which only works on Windows, but that also works on other Windows devices like the Xbox and HoloLens, and even some IoT devices, the Internet of Things devices. So that has some far-reaching beyond just the Windows desktop platform to other areas. So where does that fit into it? And then we have others as well, like Xamarin, which Xamarin's not on this list. There's, if I search for Xamarin, I can show you that. But Xamarin works on iOS, like the iPhone apps, and it works on Android for Android apps. Well, where does that fit into it? They have their own class library type. So what do you choose in all of this? And Microsoft said, yeah, we feel you. There's some difficulty here because there's all these different options, and you really have to choose the option that's best for your situation, which might restrict you from other options. So one of the things they did was they said, well, you should be able to call .NET Core DLLs from a .NET Framework application. That's helpful, but that's not the full picture. So then they came up with this idea of .NET Standard. And what .NET Standard is it's kind of like an interface. We've learned about interfaces earlier. And an interface is a contract. And it says that this class, let's say, will do these things. It has these methods and these properties and these events. Well, in the same way, the .NET Standard, what it really is an interface into .NET Core, .NET Framework, .NET for Xamarin, and even Mono. And UWP. And so what that will do is it will allow you to write a library once and target multiple different types and use them wherever you want. So the .NET Standard allows you to go to Android, iOS, Linux, Mac, Windows, which notice that's larger than even .NET Core, because .NET Core can't go to Android or iOS, but a .NET Standard project can. Essentially what happens is it says, okay, let's just take, for example, you want to write a file to the file system. Well, that's very specific to the platform that you're on, whether it's Windows, Mac, Linux, iOS, Android. Instead of writing that and having it call 5 different things, what it does is it says, okay, if you're targeting Android, I'm going to call into the Xamarin library and ask to write it the Xamarin way. And that's what the .NET Standard does. And so you may have some restrictions in .NET Standard that you don't have on the other platforms because there's not the equivalent way of doing things across all the different types. With that being said, .NET However, WPF, that we have options on. We can either run in .NET Framework or .NET Core. And we'll probably do it in .NET Core, but at least look at the .NET Framework version. So you're going to see this over and over in the following lessons where we talk about .NET Framework versus Core. The basic thing here to remember is that .NET Core is the new way to go forward. .NET Framework is the older style, and if there's an equivalent in .NET Core, move over to it. If there's not, don't worry. .NET Framework is not going anywhere. .NET Framework will be here for years to come. However, it's not getting new features. It will get security fixes, and it is a very, very mature platform. But it's not getting the new cool features that go in a .NET Core. So for new development, definitely go with .NET Core. For legacy development, you'll probably be in .NET Framework. That's why I teach both. It's great to learn the latest and greatest stuff, but you do need to have an understanding of some of the legacy things or things that used to be, because if you get a job as a C# developer right now, most likely you'll be working on .NET Framework, not .NET Core. Because think about it. If a company has put, let's say, 10 years into building a large application to support the company, how easy do you think it is to rewrite that application in a new, from .NET Framework to .NET Core? It's not simple. However, they are making it simpler, and there is an easier way to transition over than just, say, rewriting it. However, there is still a lot of companies that still have these legacy applications. So you need to learn both. Don't just concentrate on the newest, latest, and greatest thing. Still learn some of these older things as well, because they're really foundational. The other thing is they will still work today as they did yesterday. Okay, and one final thing I want to point out, because it's not terribly clear when it comes to .NET Core. And that is, if you go back to all project types, let's clear this out and search instead for WPF, which is a desktop development tool. And it's one we'll be building in coming up. Notice there's a .NET Framework version, like I said, and a .NET Core version of WPF applications. So if you're building a new application, you choose .NET Core. But one thing that people often miss is that, notice down here under the tags, it still says C# Windows Desktop, just like C# Windows Desktop. But I thought .NET Core worked across platforms. And the answer is .NET Core, the code, yes. The user interface, no. WPF, the W stands for Windows, and it's pretty tied to Windows. So it says Windows Presentation Foundation. Well, it's really tied into how Windows renders things. And so it's not something where they can easily say, let's make this into a cross-platform application. But it is .NET Core powered now. And then the question comes up, well, why would you even do that? If it doesn't change, we can do it cross-platform or not, then why make it .NET Core? And I've already kind of answered that, and there's more than one reason for .NET Core. One of the reasons is cross-platform, if it applies. Doesn't always apply. But the others are .NET Core is a lot faster. That's a big deal. And the third one is that .NET Core will be getting the latest and greatest tooling and latest and greatest features. And so having WPF powered by .NET Core allows you to get that new tooling and those new features. So that's where we are today, as of when this course was published, is that we had .NET Framework, now we have .NET Core as well, and we have .NET Standard for our class libraries. Now, .NET Standard does not go across to anything else. That's just for class libraries. But going forward, in the future, Microsoft has a roadmap that, as of right now, what they're looking to do is bring things back together and have .NET 5. And so, remember, .NET Framework is at 4.8 and .NET Core is at 3. Instead of having .NET Core 4, we're going to have just .NET 5. And they're going to try and fold in all these different confusing bits, whether it is .NET Standard or .NET Core or UWP or all these different things. They're going to try and fold into one language just called .NET 5. Now, what does not go in there is .NET Framework. So .NET Framework is done as of 4.8. It stops active development. But everything else gets folded into one, and the choice becomes simpler. It's just a .NET application again. Now, it'll be powered by essentially .NET Core, but they're going to bring in the other pieces from the other languages as well, so that you can run .NET Core on an iOS device or an Android device, like you do now with Xamarin. That's the way forward. And what that means is, as long as you move your applications over to .NET Core, or you start your applications in .NET Core or .NET Standard, either one, that when you do that, you're preparing yourself for the future. And the future is a few years off. But you're prepared for that transition. You'll just be brought in more like an upgrade than it is a brand new framework, hopefully. But either way, the transition will be smooth because we've already seen there's a smoother transition from .NET Framework to .NET Core versus a total rewrite. So Microsoft's really working on that. So that's where we're going. We're going to a .NET 5 eventually, but for right now we have .NET Standard and .NET Core for class libraries. We'll focus on .NET Standard primarily. And for all the other product types, it'll be .NET Core when we can, and if not, we'll do .NET Framework. The code will be practically identical for .NET Framework versus .NET Core, and I'll point out the differences. But it's mainly just the project type that we choose. Okay, so that's a big overview. It's kind of a high-level overview of where .NET Core is and why it's a thing and what we're going to do going forward. Okay, let me bring up the tip for today, which is that .NET Core can be cross-platform, but that doesn't mean it always is. That's one of the confusions that comes up, is that people think, oh, if it's .NET Core, it automatically goes across platform. That's not the case. We'll look at the different project types and see which ones do and which ones don't. But in general, you can't think about .NET Core as always being cross-platform. Just think it could be cross-platform. But either way, it's the way forward. Okay, I think that's enough theory, enough high-level talk. Let's move on to the next lesson where we're going to start diving into the practicality of what this means. There's not even some homework for this lesson. Just go right to the next module, next lesson in this course.